Hello everyone, my name's Andy. I'm an information specialist at the University of Sheffield. I've been interested in altmetrics for a few years, and I think metrics are quite a scary term for academics and for researchers, students, because it implies that someone's measuring you. But I see altmetrics as a bit of a more of a nicer swing away from things like H-indexes and impact factors. It's actually a bit of intelligence that shows you how your research is being communicated. It's a bit of feedback, which is something that we all like to get. Altmetrics started around 2010. It was a working group who got together, and one of them was Jason Priem from Impact Story, who basically said this. He liked the term article level metrics, but it fails to imply the diversity of measures. So lately I'm preferring altmetrics. Before this, basically, the way we looked at research was H-indexes for authors, which isn't particularly very fair. It doesn't tell us the quality of a person and their research really, and impact scores, which is very good for publishers and for journals, but it creates a great deal of anxiety as well for academics trying to publish in high-impact journals. There are lots of altmetric companies out there, and the one I'm primarily talking about is altmetric.com. Based in London, but there are others, Impact Story, who try and tell a bit of a story about your research, as well as Kudos, who try and actually capture it in a more kind of qualitative way than just a load of figures. And then there's Plum Analytics. There are altmetrics within other things. Mendeley, if you use Mendeley, that has altmetrics in there as well. That tells you how many people are reading your research. That's an altmetric. So it's beyond citations. So there was a lot of sort of like worry and concern when altmetrics first appeared. People thought that they were trying to oust the traditional metrics, and they're not. What altmetrics about? It's about complementing traditional metrics. And I say metrics do seem very dry, but on the surface, what it is, it's telling you who's communicating your work. You know, is someone tweeting this? Is someone sharing it on Facebook? Is it become a Wikipedia citation? Have you been cited in policy? Prior to a few years ago, it was really hard to find that out. You know, you had to kind of hope and pray that you stumbled on it. Whereas now we have a better idea. So it helps prove evidence and potentially impact. And that's something as you go into an academic career, that's a word you hear increasingly more about, the impact of the research that you do. And this allows you to find that impact. And it gives you credit for the work you do as well. As we've seen earlier, we talked about blogs, etc. It's finding out where those things go afterwards as well. Because you can write for a blog, you can write for the conversation, you can write for various blogs, and they can bounce on. I wrote something for the conversation, it got rerun by the World Economic Forum. I work with some of the, kind of the country's leading economists. They've not published on the World Economic Forum, but I'm able to find that out through altmetrics as well. It also allows you to track non-traditional outputs. So we usually always looked at journals, but books we can track, certain different fields, in your field that you will work in. Books have a bit more of importance than other fields than perhaps the ones that I work in. Also, data sets can be tracked. So it allows you to take these things that you make, these sets of data, and follow them down the path and see where they're going and see what the reaction is. And the way it works is quite simple. You have an output, so that could be a data set, it could be a journal, it could be a book, but it also needs an identifier. So you've got to be able to kind of track it in the same way with ORCID gives you that identifier. You need your output to have an identifier. And that can be an ISBN for a book, it can be a DOI, it can be a PubMed ID. As long as it's got that identifier, it's trackable. If it hasn't, it's just kind of sitting there somewhere in the ether. So there's a lot of things that altmetrics can track, and it's constantly being added to clinical trial records, SSRN IDs, anything sort of like archive IDs, PubMed IDs. So there's stuff being added all the time to track. There's a huge amount of things out there, and we're generating. Obviously, we're in a field, we're in an industry that generates tons of stuff, lots and lots of stuff, just not journal articles. So we're able to track news outlets, not me, I'm not altmetric, but it's able to track news outlets, media sites, lots and lots added, all the major ones that you can think of, ones far-flung on the other side of the planet. Social media, Twitter, Facebook, Google+, etc. although certain things are not added into the equation, things like Facebook Like are just a bit too kind of quick and simple. It's not really something like writing and composing a tweet or sharing something on Facebook, which takes a bit more. And again, it's not something as equal as having a blog post written about it and shared and citing your work, and then a media outlet sharing your work, or a Wikipedia citation, or a citation in policy. Also, as we move more towards open peer review and sites like Publons and PubPeer, again, getting that credit, bringing it all back in together, tracking all of this, policy documents, which have only been a recent addition in the last couple of years, but more and more are being tracked. Other sources, Wikipedia, and again, you know, it's only till recent times I think academics start to accept Wikipedia as something quite decent. You know, there's a lot of research out that showed that a large amount of Wikipedia content was being created by students and being used by researchers. So I think we've come around to the idea that Wikipedia is pretty okay these days. And then there's reference management tools, Mendeley and SiteUlite, showing you how many people are saving your articles. And there's research out there that will show that if someone saves your paper into a reference management database, they are more likely to cite it. You know, it figures they're potentially going to do something with it. They'll either cite it or reject it. The problem with traditional metrics is they've always been very slow to accrue, and the journal, you know, the actual journal publishing process is very, very slow and painful. And I was in the kitchen with a colleague of mine who does a lot of work around alcohol policy pricing, minimum pricing, which gets a lot of media coverage. And he was telling me that he finally received a paper that he'd submitted 7 months earlier, where they said, well, we could only find one reviewer. So here's your paper back. You know, it's pretty poor. It was a public health journal. But that aside, when you publish, the whole process of feedback it can be quite painfully slow. So here was one about a dinosaur piece of research that was covered, and Web of Science, Crossref and Scopus had no citation data, but already there was quite a lot of altmetric data had appeared. So in there we had, it had been picked up by 41 news outlets, it had been tweeted by 44 people. So instantly there's that feedback, there's that attention going on there, which is, again, it's very, very useful to know. And then we can dig into that data. You know, you can look at where people have been tweeting. Again, this depends on who's given geolocation data as part of their Twitter profile or has it turned on. But we can start to see who's talking about your research. Is your research actually being talked about in a different country and quite a lot? Is there some reason for that we should know about? What media organisations are talking about this? Are they, you know, could you approach them? Are they misreporting you? As we saw earlier with the stories about wine and music and things like that. You know, I used to be a journalist, I'm a trained journalist, and I worked for the Press Association, so I'd like to think I was one of the good guys, but there's a lot of the bad guys out there working for the Daily Mail and such like. So again, it at least shows you what's being said and whether you can then respond to it and how you feel about that. So it breaks down that data that we can see for this dinosaur one here. We can see that there's already 5 Wikipedia pages that now cite that research. So again, very, very useful. It also it tracks policy, and that is quite huge impact. That when we talk about research impact, if you are being cited in policy, you are having some effect potentially on policy and change. So it's an important thing to do, and I work in health-related research, so we do get cited a lot in policy. And I just published a paper 2 months ago with a colleague looking at the University of Sheffield and how much of our research had been cited in policy, and we found just under 1,500 pieces of University of Sheffield research had been cited in at least one policy document. So again, we wouldn't have known this a couple of years ago. It was hard to find out. We found that 92 were cited more than 3 times, and we also found, which was interesting, that a really long time lag between publishing your paper and being cited. It was 31 years was the longest time lag. The shortest time lag was 3 months. So something that we published was cited in a National Institute of Clinical Excellence policy document, and we'd only published it 3 months earlier, so a quick turnaround. We also found that our most cited documents, research was in health economics, public health, medicine and environmental science. But also we found lots of errors in the data, which isn't down to altmetric.com's system. A lot of it is that a lot of the databases out there, Scopus, our own institutional things that we use to put our publication records in, had human errors, people accepting papers that weren't theirs, things like that. And I think quite often it is just usual a human error rather than someone being a bit malevolent. But again, with metrics, it creates that anxiety. So people start to think, well, I've had people email me going, what's a good altmetric score? You know, what is a good altmetric score? You know, people say, well, what's a good number of citations I should have? What's the H index I should have? And it varies from discipline to discipline. It varies from where you should be in your career. But really, we are getting a bit hung up over things that don't matter. And I think the only number that matters in altmetrics is the number 0. If you do a piece of research and it has an altmetric score of 0, it means, one, either no one's talking about it, or two, they are, but there's no linking back to you or the source or the research, the DOI, the PubMed ID. So it's great that things can get cast out into the web. And again, we see this in media reporting. Researchers have found there's no link to it. So it can float around and it can get lots of coverage, but the academics may not be aware that their research is being covered. This was a tweet from a few years ago by this gentleman who said that the actual launch of Wiley's altmetric demonstrated the low impact of my Wiley article, at least I know. So, but just really good. He knows now, well, he perhaps needs to do something about it. He needs to do some kind of science communication to let people know he's published that paper. You know, it's out there for him to do that. But it's also important, and again, I wrote this as a journalist. I wrote a piece for The Conversation as well about how the media are not very, very good at citing our research. They're not very good at linking to it and giving the credit. And I often scour the things as part of my role, and I'll see something on the front of the Yorkshire Post, and I'll think, well, this is about emergency hospital admissions. We do research in that area, and I'll contact our media unit. I'll go, is this us? And they'll go, yeah, it is. And I went, who was it? And they'll say, it was Professor X. Why don't we know about this? Why is there no linking? Because there's just no name and mention. So it's important that whenever you go on perhaps to work with the media, talk to the media, you know, in blogs, write for blogs, do anything like that, tweet anything, link it to what you're doing. Let people get to the source of it. Get them to the open access source of it as well if you can. If you've got open access options, then link to that. Let people be able to read it. Because don't forget, there's a lot of people who may read your work who do not get access to university repositories and databases. You may have audiences in Africa, in China, in India, who want to read your research. So again, link, and whenever you work with the media, it's really important that you do just try and get them to make sure they kind of connect back to you. And this is what, at the University of Sheffield, I don't know about here, but at the University of Sheffield, we have an altmetric dashboard. So we can go in here and we can look at the data and we can see what papers are getting attention, we can see what authors are receiving attention, we can also see where they're getting the attention. So it gives you some competitive intelligence. If you publish a paper and you think, well, I'd like to write a blog post about this, you could look at that list that a previous speaker gave us with the blog list. But one thing you could do is you could look at similar published papers in altmetric data and see where they've been covered in blogs. And anyone can get access to this. There's a little Altmetric Explorer plugin that you can get for Chrome. I'm not sure about $5 for you. You can get it for Chrome, and you can click on a published paper, and it will give you the altmetric data, and you can look at that. So if you see someone's published something on a particular topic of interest to you, see if any blogs have covered it, and then maybe approach them. And blog editors are always keen to hear from people, and it's a fantastic reflective practice of writing. So I'm getting ahead of myself here, I'm nearly finished, but plug back to ORCID really, it's tying it all together, it's tying your individual person, you as an individual, with your works. A lot of this has come quite late, sadly, because there's a lot of stuff out there, but we can start as you mean to go on. If you're fairly early in your career, it's a good opportunity. It's when you're 30 years down the line and you're kind of professor with 150 papers, it becomes problematic to try and kind of you know, kind of, it's a bit like herding cats. But with regards to sort of like starting and moving forward, it's really, really good to get into that kind of system and to practice it.